dimension able to see the viewer, although they may feel as though they are being watched by an unseen presence. Other theories believe that the interaction is two-way, with the alter individual becoming completely trapped in the current dimension or vice versa, resulting in confusing and perhaps terrifying encounters. This theory is popularized in Hollywood, becoming the basis for television shows such as Sliders. In some cases, individuals have claimed that this entrapment is permanent. Others are simply for a short amount of time. Interestingly, this theory is a bit of a revolving door in physics. While the altered dimension theory is used to explain the existence of paranormal activity, the existence of paranormal activity is also used as evidence that altered dimensions exist. It is akin to a self-fulfilling prophecy or circular reasoning. From 4 Weird Clues That Parallel Universes Exist by Robert Schwartz. Quote, "Believe it or not, there have been a few cases of individuals who claim to belong to another world, or whose origins otherwise could not be traced. True, false, I don't know. Consider these 2 stories. 1. Lorena Garcia, who woke up one day in a world, our world, that did not belong to her. According to the story, as her day progressed, she continued to notice small incongruities, little things that were just off. But there were big things, too." And this is quoting Lorena here. "So I went to work in my car, which was parked where I'd always parked, and it was the same office I'd worked in for the last 20 years. But when I got to my department, it wasn't my department. It has names on the door, and mine was not on it. I thought I was on the wrong floor, but no, it was my own floor. I went over to the office's wireless section and looked myself up. I still worked there, thank God, but in another department, reporting to a superior I didn't even know." As an add-on, this was not simply a change that they had just done. They had not simply transferred her to another department. This was a job completely different from her previous job, and records shown that she had worked in that department, completely different from the one she remembered, for the last 20 years. And that is the end of the quote for that section. Schwartz goes on to detail the story of a man who arrived in Japan with a passport from a country which does not exist, Tuareg. He insisted this country was very real and had existed for over 1,000 years. Other than the inexplicable country, the passport seemed completely genuine. In fact, it showed that he had visited Japan several times using that passport. He also held legal documents and bank statements from the mysterious country of Tuareg. Confused and rather baffled by the apparently authentic passport, the Japanese authorities locked the man in a secured hotel room with 24/7 cameras and guards. After several hours, the guards went into the room to ask the man several more questions, and found he had completely disappeared. Now, I would like to interject my own script here to add that Tuareg is actually the name of... Excuse me, I'm sorry. Tuareg is actually the name of a culture in, I believe, Arabia, a nomadic tribe, so I find that interesting. But I don't know if there's any connection. They're not considered their own country, absolutely not. So, continuing on. Does this theory adequately explain paranormal phenomenon? Perhaps, although evidence is incredibly scanty. It does theoretically explain phenomena that have been reported in the Loveland Castle, since it allows for interaction between the phenomenon and objects or people. That takes us to our 3rd theory, which is the theory of time slips. Personally, I find this one quite intriguing, though perhaps not applicable to the Loveland Castle. The time slip theory states that time and space are intertwined, somewhat like a mesh. Occasionally, according to the theory, that mesh is disturbed, perhaps by an electromagnetic phenomenon as stated in Theory 1, resulting in a ripple in time. Similar to a Rosenberg bridge or a wormhole, but a little bit different in this case. This results in the present and past suddenly becoming crossed. A small minority of interpretations of this theory state that ghosts are occurrences of individuals seeing souls now dead from a point in time when they were alive, as though watching that past event on a television set. It is an event which happened in the past, but is being viewed in the present with no ability to interact. The majority of interpretations, however, state that an individual becomes trapped in the wrong time. A person in the present may become trapped in the past, or vice versa. The theory has become extremely popular in today's entertainment, with books such as Gideon the Cutpurse and popular televisions such as Doctor Who displaying similar themes. Similar to Theory 2, there is no physical evidence for this theory. Nevertheless, there are countless examples of individuals who claim to have experienced the phenomenon. 2 experiences of note are documented in the article The Mystery of Time Slips. Interestingly enough, there are some examples of time slips which actually have physical evidence. One of these happens to be the case of one Mr. Squirrel. In 1973, the man entered an envelope shop and was served by a woman in Edwardian dress. He bought a bunch of envelopes and left the shop. The next day, he returned once more, only to find that the entire shop had changed completely. Upon asking about the strange woman who sold him envelopes only the day before, the elderly woman at the counter was unable to recall anyone of the sort who worked there. He still had the envelopes in hand and soon discovered that the company that made the envelopes went out of business over a decade ago. In 1979, 2 married couples went for a vacation in Spain. While they were driving through France on their way to Spain, they stopped at a hotel. They stayed at the hotel, had dinner there, and stayed the night. Both couples noted that the hotel was extremely outdated. Their bedroom had no window panes, only shutters. The beds had no pillows, and there were no sheets, only a calico fabric blanket. The bill they paid seemed extremely low for the time. When they asked for directions to the nearest interstate, the hotel's staff seemed to have no idea what they were talking about, or what automobiles were. When they later had their vacation pictures developed, the pictures of the hotel were completely missing from the roll. When they returned to vacation at the same hotel, it was nowhere to be found." Unquote. In fact, the pictures of the people were visible, but the actual room they were standing in was completely black, which in that era of a camera is extremely hard to fake. Continuing on. These 2 stories are remarkable in the fact that they have physical artifacts to attest to their claims. That being said, does this theory adequately explain paranormal activity in relation to the Loveland Castle? While the fact is up for your interpretation as a viewer, I personally do not think it does. A few instances do involve ghosts similar in appearance to people believed to have lived in the area prior to the castle being built, but the majority of phenomena does not seem to have a historical anchor that would fit with the time slip theory. For example, Vikings and kings have been sighted. Obviously, there's not much evidence for Vikings or medieval era kings in Ohio, though there is speculation of the Vikings landing in America, of course. Theory 4. That leaves us our 4th theory, one that admittedly made me laugh at first: toxic mold. In many ways, this theory seems much like the old copper pipes theory, blaming the house itself for paranormal activity on evidence that is theoretical at best. Very few people whose houses were plumbed with copper pipes displayed psychotic behavior or hallucinations. Yet for some time it was the catch-all explanation for paranormal activity. In a similar way, very few people who live in or frequently occupy extremely old buildings are exposed to high levels of toxic mold. But, like copper pipe poisoning explanation, the symptoms of severe toxic mold poisoning could lead to symptoms mimicking paranormal experiences. When inhaled for an extended period of time in high quantities, the symptoms could include cognitive impairment leading to auditory or visual hallucinations, a lack of oxygen to the brain cells resulting in hallucinations, psychotic behavior, swelling of the neuroimmune axis causing hallucinations, Alzheimer's, severe depression or mood swings, heightened anxiety, paranoia, and a host of other symptoms. Ingestion of toxic mold is even more rare. But should it occur, it has even more agonizing effects. The hallucinations and intense paranoia which contributed to the Salem witch trials were attributed to toxic mold-tainted grain. This same toxic mold caused St. Anthony's fire in the Middle Ages, a collection of horrifying diseases that included rashes so severe it looked as though the victims were being burned alive from the inside out. Victims of this disease also experienced horrific hallucinations and, of course, pain. This occurred when grain was stored improperly in moist, dark barns for long amounts of time, causing the mold to grow in the grain. Common in olden days, but very rare today. Nonetheless, a group of scientists in New York State have taken hold of this theory with great vigor and are testing numerous old buildings for this toxic mold. They aim to compare the findings of mold levels as well as mildew and other things that might contribute between notoriously haunted buildings and buildings that are simply old. Can toxic mold explain away all paranormal activity? Again, that is up to the viewer, but it is a bit of a stretch in my opinion. The theory seems less like an explanation of paranormal activity and more like an attempt to explain it away. Yet it must be acknowledged that the symptoms of toxic mold inhalation could cause hallucinations and paranoia, leading one to believe that their house is haunted. Does this theory apply to the Loveland Castle example we have been using? It is hard to tell without testing the area for mold, which I am incapable of doing. I am in a completely different state, nor do I have the technology available to me. Perhaps in the future I can actually see if someone at the castle can do that. That would be quite an interesting follow-up. Paranormal activity first began while the castle was yet under construction and was completely open air. That alone would greatly inhibit mold growth. Now that the building has been finished and endured its fair share of wet weather and age, mold is not improbable to exist in the castle. While the inside is concrete, the outside stones were dragged from the river. Theoretically, this could create a haven for mold. However, stays at the castle these days are limited to overnight stays for Boy Scout troops and paranormal investigators. That is not long enough to inhale enough mold to cause hallucinations. And no matter the length of time nor amount one is exposed to, mold simply cannot throw objects across a room. Perhaps it could make you believe that that happened, but it couldn't actually do it. To conclude, do these theories presented explain paranormal activity? Do they explain the activity seen at the Loveland Castle? We at the Farmer Files leave that for you to decide. I will be covering more aspects of paranormal activity in future videos, including the prevalence of paranormal in cultures and mythos around the world. I hope you found this video interesting and informative. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we will be discussing history and paranormal activity of the Ohio Loveland Castle legend in depth.